This is the most important object you have never seen. It is roughly the width of a garden hose. It is wrapped in steel, polyethylene, and waterproof tar. Inside it, glass threads thinner than a human hair carry pulses of light. Trillions of pulses, every second, all day, all night. There are about 500 of these on the floor of the ocean. Together, they carry roughly 99% of every email, video call, bank transfer, and search query that crosses an ocean. The satellites you have heard about handle less than 1%. This is the actual internet. This is the thing the cloud is sitting on. And almost nobody knows the first thing about it. Let us start with what an undersea cable actually is. If you cut one open, you would see a series of layers wrapped around a tiny core. The outermost layer is polyethylene, the kind of tough plastic used for trash bags, but much thicker. Below that, steel wire mesh, woven for strength and to resist crushing. Below that, copper, used to send electrical power down the length of the cable to keep it operational. And at the very center, a small bundle of optical fibers, each one about the width of a human hair, each one capable of carrying tens of terabits of data per second. A single modern cable, no thicker than your wrist, can move more data in 1 second than the entire global telegraph network moved in its first 50 years of existence. And there are 500 of them. Some are short, just a few kilometers between Mediterranean islands. Some are enormous. The longest, called the CME-3, runs from Germany to Australia, with 39 landing points across 19 countries. Total length, just under 39,000 kilometers. That is roughly the circumference of the Earth. Together, these cables form a quiet, parallel global infrastructure that most of the public has no mental picture of at all. Building one of these cables is one of the more extraordinary engineering operations on the planet, and it has been done so many times that almost nobody covers it anymore. It starts, of all places, with a chart of the ocean floor. Before any cable is laid, ships spend months running survey routes across the proposed path, mapping the terrain with sonar. They are looking for two things. First, the shortest viable path. Second, somewhere they will not catch the cable on something. Because the ocean floor is not, as most of us imagine, a smooth, dark plain. It has mountains, taller than the Alps. It has canyons deeper than the Grand Canyon. It has trenches that drop another 3 kilometers below the average seafloor. It has volcanic vents, mudslides, and underwater rivers of dense salt water that scour the bottom like wind. And it has things on it, shipwrecks, old munitions, other cables, sometimes 150 years old, that nobody has thought about in decades. Once a route is mapped, a specialized ship called a cable layer begins the actual work. The ship carries the entire cable on a giant rotating drum below decks. As the ship moves slowly forward, the cable spools out, descends into the water, and settles on the ocean floor under its own weight. In shallow water, near the coast, the cable is buried under the sediment by a remotely operated machine called a plow, which cuts a small trench, drops the cable in, and lets it backfill. In deep water, the cable just sits on the floor. It does not need to be anchored. 3 kilometers down, there are no currents strong enough to move it. A typical transatlantic cable takes a single ship about 90 days to lay. The whole operation costs somewhere between $100 and $300 million. It is, depending on how you count, the most expensive piece of disposable infrastructure most companies will ever buy. I say disposable because cables do not last forever. A modern cable has a design life of roughly 25 years. After that, the optical fibers degrade, the steel armor corrodes, and the cable becomes uneconomical to maintain. The old cable is sometimes recovered, sometimes simply abandoned. There are tens of thousands of kilometers of dead cable sitting on the ocean floor right now, slowly being colonized by deep-sea life. And during their working life, these cables fail constantly. On average, somewhere in the world, a cable gets cut about once every 3 days. Most of the cuts happen in shallow water, where the cables are vulnerable to ship anchors and fishing trawlers. A surprising number, especially near East Africa and Southeast Asia, happen because fishing boats are dragging weighted nets across the seafloor and snag on the cable. In a few documented cases, sharks have actually bitten cables, apparently attracted by the electromagnetic field of the power-carrying copper layer. When a cable goes down, traffic gets rerouted. Most major routes have redundant cables specifically, so that one cut does not bring down a region. But the redundancy is not as deep as you might assume. In 2008, 3 cables in the Mediterranean were cut within a few days of each other, and India lost roughly 60% of its international internet capacity for 2 weeks. Repair is its own enormous operation. A dedicated repair ship, of which there are roughly 50 in the world, sails to the cut site. Submersibles, or grappling hooks, bring the broken ends to the surface. Engineers splice the fiber optics by hand, on board, in a sealed clean room the size of a small kitchen. The job takes about a week. The repair ship can cost up to $100,000 a day to operate. Here is the part of the story that almost never gets told. For most of the 20th century, the undersea cable network was owned by national telecommunications companies, national telephone monopolies in the US, the UK, France, Japan, and a handful of others. The infrastructure was effectively a public good, regulated by governments, paid for by consumers through their phone bills. That has changed dramatically in the last 15 years. Today, the majority of all new cable construction is being paid for, and owned outright, by 4 companies: Google, Meta, Amazon, Microsoft. In the year 2010, those 4 companies owned a small minority of global cable capacity. By 2024, they collectively owned or leased the majority of all transatlantic capacity, and they were the primary funders of roughly 2/3 of all new construction worldwide. They did not buy this capacity from telecom companies. They built it themselves. Google now contracts directly with cable-laying companies to commission new private routes. The cable Google paid to lay between Los Angeles and Hong Kong cost over $300 million and is, formally, owned by a Google subsidiary. This is a quiet but profound shift in how the global internet works. For most of the public, the internet still feels like a kind of shared utility, regulated by governments, accessible to all. The physical infrastructure underneath that feeling is increasingly owned by a small number of American technology companies, which raises some uncomfortable questions about jurisdiction, about resilience, and about what happens when the interests of those companies diverge from the interests of the countries those cables happen to land in. There is no global authority that regulates undersea cables. There is no international treaty that governs them in any meaningful way. They sit in international waters, in a legal gray zone that was never really designed for the role they now play. It is, in a very practical sense, infrastructure without a country. If you stand on certain stretches of coast, in certain countries, you can sometimes see, just above the high tide line, a small concrete building. No signs. Sometimes, a fence. Sometimes a guard, sometimes not. Almost always anonymous. These are cable landing stations. The places where the undersea cables come up from the ocean floor, cross the beach, and connect to the rest of the network. There are roughly 1,200 of these buildings in the world. Most are in countries you would expect: the US, the UK, France, Japan. Some are in countries you would not. Djibouti, on the Horn of Africa, has become one of the most strategically important cable landing locations on Earth, simply because it sits at the choke point between the Mediterranean, the Red Sea, and the Indian Ocean. 3 of the world's largest cables make landfall there. Several of the world's largest militaries have built bases nearby. The country has, in effect, become geopolitically valuable because of where the cables decided to land. This pattern is starting to repeat in unexpected places. The Internet's physical geography is creating a new layer of national strategic importance, one that has very little to do with traditional ideas of resource wealth. None of this is something most of us think about. We log on, we send a message. We assume the system is robust, redundant, and somebody's responsibility. Most of the time, all 3 of those assumptions hold. But it is worth, occasionally, picturing what is actually carrying the message. A piece of fiber optic glass, on the floor of the ocean, 3 kilometers down, owned by a company you have never met, sitting in international waters that have no governing authority, and carrying enough of human civilization's daily communication that if one cable in the wrong place got cut, an entire region of the world would, briefly, go dark. It is the most underrated infrastructure on the planet. It is the most exposed. And it is the most quietly contested. Next time you send a message to someone on another continent, take a moment to think about the cable. Picture it, still down there, lying in the dark, doing the most important job in the modern world, owned by a private company, maintained by a few dozen ships, defended by no one in particular. And then, send the message anyway, because the system, for all its strangeness, still works, hundreds of trillions of times a day. It is, in its own peculiar way, the most successful piece of leaderless engineering humans have ever attempted. The next time someone says the internet is in the cloud, you will know better. The internet is on the floor of the ocean, wrapped in steel, lit from inside by glass.